Thank you for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, so happy to be here.
So I was at your lab session yesterday, where as an audience member, I expected to learn a lot about you, which I did, which we can talk about later.
Yeah.
What I did not expect was to learn the real history of rock and roll. And what I would love if you could share with us is the history of rock and roll versus his story of rock and roll, which I was taught.
Sure. So we are taught this sort of version that rock and roll is centered around a lot of white men. And those white men have taken care in more recent history to mention Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters and Little Richard as these sort of bedrock foundational pieces of where rock and roll comes from. But in fact, those players were all going to listen to Sister Rosetta Tharpe play. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is an incredible singer, guitarist, entertainer, performer who came up playing, started in really the late 20s, early 30s. And, you know, I think her most popular clip on YouTube is her playing Up Above My Head, which you can look at, over millions of views now at this point. And when you listen to her playing, she has a very distinct sound that as soon as you hear it, you immediately hear how it's connected to Little Richard, Tutti Frutti, how it's connected to Chuck Berry, that jing, 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 like it's all Sister Rosetta. And, it's a history that's relatively new for me to have learned. I would say maybe 10 years ago, right? And it's because we in this country have a selective memory, especially when it comes to all marginalized groups, but in particular, I think Black women. And so I feel always so excited to talk about her and really excited to be a part of continuing her legacy, really.
I saw your shirts last night after the show. Rock and roll is a woman.
Yeah, it's a Black woman.
It's a Black woman, that's right.
Because rock and roll, I talked about this a little bit in the lab today, but it's like rock and roll as a genre, it's literally, it is the Black woman personified. That is the spirit of this. When you look at, I think I've seen an interview clip of Mick Jagger talking about how his sort of take was in sort of emulating this thing that he saw in churches visiting like a Black church, right? And so there is so much of rock and roll, the call and response, the energy, the way in which you bring people up. If you are a Black person that grew up in church, you're used to seeing that every Sunday, right? So I think this time that we're in, for me, it's less about shaming people and embarrassing people and more about saying, I know it seems like it comes from this, but let's go further and tell you actually, if you are a fan of John Mayer, Jeff Beck, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimmy Page, Keith Richards, all of these players, you're a fan of Sister Rosetta, and here's why. It's an exciting thing to educate people on.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
Like I said, it wasn't something I expected to learn. The other thing, and I just think you're so well positioned to help so many people. And what, again, I really appreciated something that you said yesterday about people can't ignore me, right?
No.
and your comfort in your skin and the representation, right? So whether you're on your own stage like last night or you're sharing the stage with greats like Joni Mitchell, there are hundreds to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people who are seeing a comfortable person in their skin versus what we are all surrounded with generally via media and Instagram telling us we're supposed to be a different thing.
That's right.
How does that, we talk a lot about kind of the importance of music to bring people together and connect, right?
Yes.
And to kind of heal and to shift the way people think about it, shift perceptions.
Yeah.
How has that been for you as like somebody who can do that and really help others?
It's interesting because I think I do a lot of acting as if, they say. it's not that I always feel the way that I present, but I sort of made a pact with myself many, many years ago that if I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling a way about my body, let's say, I am allowed to feel all of those feelings up until the point I step on the stage and the millisecond I step off. But when I step onto that stage, it is sacred. It is a space where none of those things matter. And I am there in service. That is like, I say that with so much sincerity. I believe that I have a call on my life to speak to people's souls. And part of that comes with my willingness to show up in the fullness of who I am. And part of that fullness is showing up into spaces, being very human. And you bringing up this idea about what we see in media, it's such a major thing, because so much is crafted to make it appear like these people are perfect. These people have it all figured out. These people have all the money, have the right clothes, are the right size, are the right skin tone, are the right whatever. When in fact, I can speak very directly on having peeked behind that curtain. And very often these people are the most miserable people there are, because it's all smoke and mirrors, right? So I feel I want to lay my head on my pillow every night feeling like what I'm attempting to do in an industry that is rife with self-centeredness, with narcissists, with excess, with gluttony, with so much. I think all of us ultimately got into it because we love the thing and we know the power of the thing. And I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I'm always trying to reach for what feels the most true and the most authentic, because from that space, it can affect the most people in the most real way.
Absolutely. On a similar vibe, and in a different way of affecting people, and really kind of, I think, helping you confront people sometimes, right?
Yes.
And
My existence, quite frankly, is like, and it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to see from the stage. In particular, it's usually white men, many white men who are like, oh, I can't wait. And then some, I always save names, but there's kind of this is, the guitar community is an interesting space. And I barely call myself a guitarist, mainly because I'm like, I don't want to take on all of that, all of what comes with that. There are all of these guys who started taking lessons when they were 4, 5. They went to Berkeley, they went to their conservatories, and they have all of this incredible facility and can play anything, can read anything, can sight read anything, can play anything by ear. And there's this sort of silent animosity they all have, right? You're back there nodding because you get it, where it's like, especially, I hate saying it, but it's like the guys really that are deep jazzers, there oftentimes becomes, there's this competitive, you don't know as much as me, I've spent more hours thing. And then here comes me, and I'm like, well, I have all this training, all this knowledge, and all this other stuff. But with guitar, I just kind of fell into it and fell in love with it and started figuring things out, and then realized like, oh, I have a unique way to say something. And it upsets those men so deeply, because on paper, theoretically, it's supposed to be our everything tells us. The white guy that took these steps, worked in these ways, he should be the one standing on the stage at the Gorge. He should be the one at Love Rocks, right? He should be the one at the Beacon. But I think part of the reason why it's me is because I'm real. And if you see me play guitar, I'm at once, I'm chasing a moment, and I'm fighting it. I'm like on that stage reaching for something every day. And I think there's something very confronting about that. If you were a person that is super technical and learned, and you come at music because of all of what you know, as opposed to all of what you feel, it elicits a lot of feelings. And I ultimately am just like, well, as my mom has said for many years, God's favor ain't fair. It just is. Yeah.
I think one other way that I was surprised yesterday when you spoke, and you started to go down like kind of technical and equipment, right? And very aware of the audience in the room.
Yeah.
I think you just kind of asked, are there people here who actually are guitarists
Yeah.
who appreciate this? And I'm thinking, oh, I'm one of the few who actually won't, so this might go over my head. But then you told the story about your amps, and I'm like, oh, this is an incredible story. And I think that was another confronting thing. It was like, well, here's what happened, here's the response, and then what you did in response to the response. Would you talk a little bit about
Yes. So I met this incredible engineer, builder, maker, Chris Benson. He owns a company called Benson Amps in Portland. And I had been looking for kind of like my signature thing, like my sort of sound, and he had an amp I was really interested in. And because I am the way that I am, I was like, oh, I want to make something that's just like cute, like beyond how it's going to sound. I know it's going to sound great, but I had this idea to do this stack, a cabinet that's a 4x12. I spoke about this a little bit yesterday. For those who aren't familiar, 4x12 cabinets are they're these big cabinets with 4 speakers in them that you, for all intents and purposes, 95% of the time have no need for today in modern music, because they're overkill, they're so loud. And they were made at a time when amps were not being mic'd, so they needed something that was super loud in these big, sort of open spaces. This kind of setup is very synonymous with the Jimi Hendrix, for instance. And so you don't see it happening much these days because, one, you don't really need it. Two, it's a very bold thing to do because you've only really seen these kind of setups with all of these people that are very much regarded as like guitar gods. And so for me, not thinking about that context at all, I just was like, this will be cool and look really cute. And I put on the cabinet, Celisse loves you, because I do. And so at first, when Chris was first working on this piece and would post little clips or pictures of it on socials, you see these comments from people who are like, "Ah, sick, gross, it's pink, like disgusting, like so worked up at the idea of something so bold, so feminine, so in your face." And then when I came out into the world, I mean, the majority of the response was people being like, "This is incredible." But we'd show up into festival environments, and you've got a lot of crew guys who've been doing this business a long time, right? And so they open the lid to this amp, and it's like, oh, here we go. There's this assumption that it's a gimmick of some kind. And then every situation, those amps come out, and I play, and there's always inevitably some older crew gentleman who finds me and apologizes and says, I had a judgment when I saw this, and then I heard you, right? And so that response made me want to double down and go, well, why don't we make 2 of them? So now if you come out and see me, you see two of these amps, again, like, technically, there's a lot of other configurations I could do that are smaller, less sound, whatever it is, but there's something about the boldness of it and saying, why wouldn't I be allowed to do this? Because if I were a 30-something white guy and was doing it, there'd be no question. But there's something about me and the visual of me and how I'm in this space. I'm not apologizing for anything. Nobody can trace, oh, I studied with this teacher and I graduated from Berkeley. Like, I don't have any of that. I just am like, I love music too, and I love guitar too, and here's how I do it. And it makes some people like, I can't. But most people really excite. Most people, it makes them feel like, well, why can't I choose what I want to do and who I am and how I would authentically represent myself, as opposed to feeling like I should look to my left and my right and see what everybody else is doing. What do I care about everybody else? I'm me. I'm only on this earth right now. I want to have pink sparkly things and have fun.
Michael, do you have anything?
Sure. Hi.
Hi.
I had a whole bunch of things I was thinking of, but I actually wanted, you said so much in the last 10 minutes or whatever it is that I want to pick up on, if you don't mind. First of all, do you know what, Lily is white?
I mean,
She's your best friend.
no, not my best friend. I wish. I am a huge, long-time
Remind me of
fan.
her.
I love Lily. Do you know Lily as
Yeah, I do.
I mean, I came up, because, I come from theater, right? So
I know.
I grew up years listening to her sing the Life, and,
Unbelievable.
that recording she did of the reunion concert of Dreamgirls from like the early 2000s. I'm a huge fan of hers, but we've never worked together.
I used to see her club acts, Steve. She used to do a lot of club acts.
Do you live in New York?
Yeah, I did for a long time. Yeah.
Where are you now?
I'm in Newport, Rhode Island, of all places.
Well,
But the
that's
Newport
cool.
Film Festival, that's where I saw you.
That's right.
In my hometown,
That's
which is
right.
so cool. So here's the deal, my dear. Your video, your Freedom video, that was remarkable. First of all, the fact that you're using black and white film, which I wish everybody would use black and white film more. I didn't know they still make that.
To give Tyler Newhouse, the director and cinematographer, the person who's in charge for the whole of those visuals. I don't think I know so little about that world. He made everything look so beautiful, and he early on was like, I feel like the tonal way to capture this thing is to be in black and white until the very end, and then to bring it into color. So I wish I could take credit for that idea. It was Tyler, who was just so incredible.
It was amazing. But it also made me think of a Toni Morrison quote on race, which to me is probably it's kind of the smartest thing I've ever heard, because it's a very hard thing to describe. I mean, first of all, she calls it a neurosis. She calls it a mental illness.
Yeah.
Racism as mental illness.
Yeah.
But she also says, and this is from Beloved, these people do this thing who practice racism. They're bereft, right? That is something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge mistake and a waste, and it's a corruption and distortion. And she talks about, she has this great story about, she would walk into a room in which she was the only black person or whatever, and, and she always knew more than anybody else in the room. Yeah. She was always the smartest person in the room, and her best friend was Fran Lebowitz.
Yeah.
How do you do that, right?
Yeah, right.
But it's like, to talk about race as something that has been inflicted on us, or something, right? Yeah. Or something that, we're probably secretly racist, and we really have to do whatever it is, whatever paradigm that we as a people, as humanity, have invented for ourselves to get off the hook.
Yes.
That's not it. It's mental illness. Yes. And if you have that mental illness, you need to, I would have no problem going to, and the thing is, am I racist? I don't know. I don't, but to go to a therapist and say, the therapist asking me, why are you here? I said, because I haven't had a sexually active relationship in 10 years, and I want to be in a relationship. And are you really no, I'm a racist. I'm here because I'm
yeah.
I mean, for somebody to actually say that, where does that fit in paradigm, right? So what I love about that video of yours is that it's head on, and it's not like, you know, it didn't disappear, you know, and it's sort of in line with that thing. And I'm curious about why, when people were looking at the roots of rock and roll and they stopped at the white guy, why didn't they go back?
Well, why do you think?
Because they stopped at the white guy. Or because they're so used to the patriarchy that it stops there, right?
Yeah.
The buck stops here. Why? And the thing that's, it's such a denial of curiosity, which I think we really suffer from, particularly when you talk about race.
Yeah.
Race is very curious, like it's very multidimensional, right?
Yeah.
Like anything, if you're interested in it. I don't think most people are interested in stuff that makes them feel anything.
That's right.
It's terrifying.
The denial of curiosity, someone write that down, that's a song. It's so exactly
and especially,
it.
it's the second time I've said this today, but it's really...
I
right?
think, you know, I don't know what kind of family you grew up in, but certainly...
Fucked up.
Well, welcome. We're all here in this room, we're artists, so that's the reason.
Yes, I wouldn't be here if they weren't.
But I think, to sort of draw the correlation, it's like, in households with dysfunction, right? There's usually some adult in the system that can't be questioned, or can only be questioned to a certain degree. So if you're the child, I certainly was the precocious child that was always like, but why? But why? It makes no sense. You know, I was in church being like, he walked on water, make it make sense for me. Because I can't walk on water, he can walk on water. And it wasn't, I might not get to the place of believing that Jesus did indeed walk on water. But the fact that I'm even asking the question and it makes every adult in the room go, I'm like, well, if this thing is so fragile, it can't be questioned, well, that's not a thing I can, right? And so where I draw this correlation with race is, I think at the most simple and basic of levels, if we're giving everyone all the grace, I think in one's environment, it's a challenging thing to be willing to ask the question that nobody else wants to talk about in the room in general, right? And it usually starts in your home with people that you love and care for and spend the most, right? So there has to be a willingness to do a certain kind of investigation, personal interrogation, that I think in general people struggle with.
Yeah. Anthropology, archaeology.
And, you know, that brilliant Toni Morrison quote about the distortion ultimately, because that is what it is. It's so profound, right? Because it's all of us in our own ways being raised, being told that 2 + 2 is 5. And you're the child in the room, right? So some adult says 2 + 2 is 5. And you're like, okay, it's 5. And then as you're going on in life, you're like, well, now I've learned how to work a calculator. And when I put 2 + 2 in, it says 4. But everyone around me keeps saying it's 5, so it's 5. And then you keep going along. And then all of a sudden you meet a person who's like, okay, so the thing is, it's 4 and I've bet my life on it. And if you say it's 5, it's actually a direct affront to me. Now you have the task of going, okay, the thing is inside of me, I know it's 4 too. But I've been not only so deeply conditioned, but literally the entirety of my environment says it's 5, and we're all so linked in on believing.
How can they be wrong?
Right? It is curious and it is multifaceted, and I think, in my experience, certainly these days, I've had very few experiences of just like hateful people. They exist. But in my direct experience, it's more, I think the scariest person to me, the most challenging person to me, is the apathetic liberal.
Yeah, right.
Is the person who's like, oh, I believe it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
but I want to have a conversation with you about it.
Right.
I won't allow you as a black person to tell you, I want to bring to your awareness how the thing you've just said or the thing you just did is challenging.
But
Right?
It's also, yeah, I've always had this concept that the white heterosexual male is the only segment of the population that actually lives in an echo chamber. Most people have to live or choose to live in more than one world, right?
Sure.
I'm gay, I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm whatever, right? I mean, so at least I live in two different worlds, right? The white heterosexual male is in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And they're not even curious, back to curiosity, they don't care about the other worlds. They don't have to live in another world except the one that they've only created for themselves.
So here's my question. Here's the question I ask you. I don't want to assume I don't know your sexuality.
I'm clear.
Okay, so I would ask, you have, I would assume some family members that are cis het men, right? White men. What do you think? What is the chink in the armor? What is the entry point in? I can see in my life art.
Yeah, actually. Somebody once asked me, I was in an elevator with somebody once and they said, we were talking about children or something, and I said, I don't have children, I'm gay, sort of as a joke. And she got really mad at me, and she said, gay people are having children. I said, I'm old school. The thing I loved about being queer when I was a kid was that I didn't have to have children.
I didn't have to do
I
that.
don't want to be hindered. So guess what I replaced it with? Art. I will leave something. We all will, right?
Yeah.
But isn't that more important than just producing yourself over and over again?
Well, yes.
I mean,
yes.
I'm sure you feel that. Every artist feels that way.
Yes.
Even with kids.
I would agree. I don't have children, and I don't believe I have the desire to have them.
I would say that's a probably good subject.
I'm keeping my hands open, but as each year passes, I have so many friends with kids, and I'm like, I love these children, and I love being the aunt that goes, good night, goodbye, goodbye. But yeah, I mean, I love hearing you say that because I would agree. I think of all the things I have, I'm like, art is the weapon. Art is the medicine. Art is it's the way. And I think too, there's, I grew up in predominantly white neighborhoods. We were usually one of the few black families around. And
Where was that?
so I grew up in Northern California, right? So my parents, are you from Northern California? Where?
Chico.
Oh, okay. So I was born in Oakland. I mean, raised kind of all over the East Bay. I was in Sassoon for some years, and we went to Antioch. My parents are in Pleasanton. But being in California is funny because it's a conservative state with like liberal cities like San Fran and Oakland and Berkeley. But in between those other cities, like I feel like I grew up in an environment that was pretty much like the Midwest. One high school, one grocery store, very sort of kind of rural almost, right? And so I think growing up in this environment, then getting into theater, and then it's so unfortunate to say this, but because I have had a fair amount of success in a lot of different facets of the industry, unfortunately for now, it often feels like the greater the climb of success, the fewer and fewer and fewer people of color, queer people, everything there are. So I have, fortunately or unfortunately, had to become very skilled at being in all white spaces and knowing how to have moments where I have every right to be angry. I have every right to be rageful. I have every right to be frustrated and to somehow take that inside and then go, how do I communicate this to you, right? Mm-hmm. And so in my saying this, in my sort of conversations with the straight white men in my life, when I've said, let's talk about this thing with race or this thing,
Where do they begin?
Well, for me, I've kind of arrived at a place in my life too where like I am a very, what's the right language to use? I don't love the word boundaries, but I think you'll understand. Like I'm a person that I very much value my time and my energy, and the people that I love ferociously. So I'm kind of like, you're welcome to come in, but there are rules when you get in here, right? And so I think, especially in 2020, when I released this song, Freedom, I kind of got to this place in my life where I was like, okay, I'm doing an accounting of all of my relationships and of this sort of sect here of the white folks in my life. I have to know with these people that I keep close, this is someone who's calling me about the march that they're going to. I can't hold a space for apathy. And I especially cannot hold a space for apathy from straight white men.
You have to protect your heart.
No. I mean, absolutely. And also, like, I'm sort of like, you know, in so many ways, action is the easiest in this group. I'm like, do you know how easy it is to do anything? And so a lot of those conversations for me started with, I love you, you know I love you, here's what I see right now, here's what's disappointing to me, and as much as I love you, I will release you from my life if you can't figure this out. It's not for me to help you get there, you know, but it is for you to go, why is it that I'm seeing people killed every day and I'm on Instagram posting about fucking Blink-182's remastered fucking anniversary album or some shit. You know what I mean? I'm like, great, someone died today. Why doesn't that do anything? But going back to what you're talking about, to have the sense to post that means you have the sense to look at how this thing is happening and how it would never happen to you, which means you have to have the sense to look at your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents who said a bunch of dumb shit to you in your household, which means you have to be willing to go home to that Thanksgiving dinner and go to your racist dad and say, you're racist, member. You raised me as a racist and this sucks. Like, it takes a lot. And I have empathy, and I'm also like, yes, welcome. I guess when I talk to my grandmother who picked cotton in the fields, who talks about how her journey from Shreveport, Louisiana to California, her and my aunt got on the train. Woof. They got on the train and a racist white train conductor saw these two black women and wanted to harass them. So they told them for that 5-day trip they could not sit for 5 days. So in that context, I think if we're looking at we're trying to look at different challenges, I think you have to have a conversation with yourself. If my grandmother could stand for fucking 5 days on a train, my grandmother could pick cotton in the fucking fields, you can maybe figure it out. If I can, like, today in fucking 2022, I know that if I was with my father, likely in this beautiful, lovely, gorgeous white town, and my dad was driving his Mercedes, looking the way that he looks, it is likely my father would be pulled over for no reason. I've seen it time and time and time again.
And understand what they had to do to just survive.
That's right.
On a daily basis.
That's right.